Alright there guys, there's another response, probably my last of the night, I don't know, about this violence, rape, natural psychology stuff, broken, whether psychologies are ever broken, or whether it's a situation that's broken, or whether it's the history of the person that's broken, or whatever, and how things like blame figure into that, which I hadn't thought about until you mentioned it, so that's pretty interesting. Okay, I think there's a number of points here. I think I've confused myself a bit, and probably everybody else as well, but by bringing in this whole military thing, because it started off as a discussion about rape, and then I started using examples drawn from military about atrocities in wartime, or something like it, which is a bit confusing because they're not exactly parallel situations. There's kinds of relationships, but they're not perfect analogies by any means. But I kind of have to address that now since I brought it up. Yeah, you've got this, I don't know, interesting image of what constitutes soldiers and military people. I don't know. I mean, I'm pretty much of a pacifist myself, but my brother is a military person. He was in the Navy for most of his life, and very gentle guy, really. He didn't have a psychology of violence, as far as I'm aware. And that's certainly the case with most military people that I've come across. And to the extent that military people are capable of at least tolerating violence, as you put it, well, that's their job, really. And and if we as a society decide that we don't want military people anymore, then that's a different story. But we have decided that we want military people in our lives, and we do want that system. You know what I mean? We do seem to want that, and we certainly benefit from it. We certainly live our lives as if we're perfectly happy with it. So, if we want that, then we better get used to the idea that we're training people to tolerate violence, which isn't the same thing, and this is a really important distinction, I think, which isn't the same thing as stepping over the line. Given the idea of the soldier and the idea of the military person is one we accept, then there are good and bad soldiers. There is appropriate behaviour for soldiers to engage in, and there's inappropriate behaviour. When the Vietnam War was at its height, it was absolutely appropriate and morally correct in terms of everything that we hold dear for those soldiers to go into the jungles and kill the Viet Cong. That was their job. Whether we like that now from the benefit of hindsight is a different story, but that's, we have to accept that they were behaving in a moral way. Individually, whether the whole war was moral is a different story, but the individual soldiers were behaving in a moral way. The guys who shot the children and raped the women in My Lai were not behaving in a moral way. They were not doing good soldierly activity. They'd crossed some kind of a line. They'd broken the Geneva Convention. They'd done all this kind of stuff. So it isn't right to align violence, legitimate violence, with illegitimate violence and say they're the same thing. Whether we like it or not, we do have the concept of legitimate violence in wartime. And of course, yes, I'm sure under fire or in extreme situations of extreme stress during wartime, a soldier might cross the line, and that certainly seems to be what happened in My Lai and in other places, or under certain kinds of psychological conditions. Lines might be extended in perhaps unfortunate ways. The soldiers who carried out the waterboarding in quite recently, I don't know if they were crossing the line. I think they were crossing the line, but you talked to Dick Cheney about that, and he was just giving them a dunk in the water. So, yeah, it's not quite as simple as that. One thing's for sure, though, of course, the guy who was getting waterboarded had none of the blame, and none of the children and none of the women in My Lai were in any way responsible for what happened to them. I'm going to try and cut back to that later, but I think that is important. There are victims, and there are aggressors, and there are situations, and the victim never plays a part in the culpability of the act. Okay, so that's the first thing to do, something to do with military thing. I still haven't quite got that in my mind yet, but there's a confusion there. I don't really know how firemen got in there. I've got a lot of respect for firemen. I always wanted to be a fireman, never made it. But somehow firemen have been included in your hit list there, Gary. Anyway, second point, it looks like naked, it says natural, that's probably a Freudian slip. You mentioned the natural psychology of a human being. which you seem to be associating with some kind of noble savage, that we've come into this world and we're basically good, but then society corrupts us and it's all crap. Yeah, maybe. And there's the other version, which is the one that I was talking about recently with TJ, which is this Leviathan idea, that we come into this world as nasty, brutish and short individuals, kind of. Well, that was how the life of early man was characterised. Yeah, we come into this world as like savage monsters which must be tamed by the Leviathan-like state. Yeah, and you're obviously aligning yourself here with more of a noble savage idea, that we are, basically good guys. We basically love women. We basically don't kill people, and everything else is an artificial deviation or distortion of that. Oh, I mean, you might be right. Maybe Thomas Hobbes is right. My own personal opinion is we're probably just really fucking adaptable. I mean, certainly the evidence seems to be that we, out of all the species of animals in the world, we're the most successful in terms of our adaptability. I mean, we're physiologically adaptable. We live all over the bloody planet. We seem to be capable of just modifying the environment to suit us, to suit ourselves. We seem to be able to develop tools and techniques for allowing ourselves to survive in all kinds of situations, and we also survive in all kinds of social situations. We sort of live in family groups, live in different kind of family groups. We live in gay groups and straight groups. We live in large cities and small towns, and some people live in Montana on their own in log cabins. We're enormously adaptable, and constantly, it seems to me, mirroring the environment around us and mirroring the social world around us. So, I wouldn't be at all surprised, given our adaptability, that some of us turn out nasty and brutish and some of us turn out quite noble. I suppose the idea of a good society would be to try to encourage people to be a bit more noble than brutish. But I don't have any data on that. That's just my gut feeling, really. I've made a note here with something you said. You said there's probably a lot of frustration out there. Yeah, I think this was. I don't know. I'm probably reading between the lines here, but it seemed to me at that point when you were doing your spiel that you were saying that men, particularly, have a kind of, if not aggression, then sort of desires for some kind of rough, tough lifestyle. Which is about chopping trees down and maybe, I don't know, doing something with their hands and getting the rocks off in a kind of a grand. Kind of a rough and tumble way, and because we can't get that in modern society, it becomes deviant. I mean, it may be true, but it doesn't really align to the other stuff you've been saying about our kind of natural tendencies to love one another. I mean, certainly there is a lot of talk about that idea. I mean, certainly I remember in the 1980s there was a lot of stuff to do in the men's movement, which I was kind of slightly involved with at the time, and some of that involved doing things like taking off drums into the woods and doing the Iron John thing with drums and trying to do the back to nature, let's all be men and get out of our system stuff, really. I don't know, it all seems a bit silly in retrospect, but there might be some truth in that. Certainly I enjoy going to the gym or doing something physical for a while. I don't think it either adds to the possibility of my raping someone or lessens the possibility. I think it's just something I like doing. Who knows? Okay, the last thing I just want to mention here, I've only got a couple of minutes left actually, it's just to do with excuses, and this is a really good point that you brought up here, and it sort of swings us back to the original ideas to do with culpability and who's to blame and how morality features within this, because you seem to be suggesting or just implying that I'm kind of making excuses. If I'm pointing to circumstance under which certain immoral behaviour can emerge, that I'm taking the blame for that behaviour away from the person who carries out the act. And it is complex, so I'm going to have to be really careful how I phrase my words here, because I could easily be misunderstood. I suppose what I'm saying is that I am observing in our society some differences in how that's regarded. The first thing to say is our legal system is absolutely, and I completely support this, our legal system absolutely attributes responsibility for individual acts to the individual carrying out those acts. And I completely support this. And it's the only way to do it, really, I think, legally. we can make kind of Twinkie pleas, you know what I mean? But we can say, oh, it was this guy's diet that made him do it, or we could say, you know, that she was having premenstrual tension and that's what made her do it, or we could say he had a bad upbringing and that's what made him do it. We can kind of make these gestures, but we know that what we're really saying is he's to blame, and we're just trying to find some slight mitigating circumstances for it. But the blame has to lie with the offender, the criminal, the person who just commits the act. It certainly doesn't lie, as I said earlier, anywhere near the victim. You can never put it on the victim, that's no doubt about that. Whether it be rape, whether it be a kind of war crime, whether it be an act of violence, it belongs with the criminal. But there are complications around those circumstances, and there's a lot of evidence coming out of Abu Ghraib, coming out of My Lai, coming out of the Zimbabwe prison studies, for example, that circumstances can at least enhance the possibility of criminals in a great kind of perfect storm of shit, really. Anyway, I'm out of time. Thanks very much.